We have Drew Fioranelli with DATAMARK. He is here to talk about the new first response frontier, part 2. Is that right? Part 2.
That's correct.
I don't know if I saw part 1. I'll have to catch myself up. Drew Fioranelli is a public safety GIS professional and sales lead for DATAMARK. Drew draws upon an extensive background of business development and local government experience in addressing the evolving world for GIS for next generation 911. And I see Drew has a screen share up. We're good. Thank you for joining us, Drew. Take it away.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kim. And great job on my last name. Most people are like, yeah, Drew's here. So
I have a Sicilian husband.
Oh, perfect. So that should have been easy for you guys. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out. Day 2 at WLIA. I've been so excited to be a part of the event this year. I will preface this with, I know a lot of you guys are probably looking forward to Sarah Rollins presenting part 2. So part 1 was at WLIA's event last year and seemed to go off without a very wildly successful. And we wanted to follow that up. And her initial idea was to follow that up with something sort of a panel to discuss what we've learned about next generation 911 over the past several years and what we've learned about Wisconsin through our engagements and our interactions with GIS and public safety professionals throughout Wisconsin. That sounds like an amazing presentation. I can't do that because I'm not Sarah. So I will say that we do have an option. I do have a presentation put together for you guys that is really walking through next generation 911 and change management. But I think I can get through this with enough time that if we did want to open things up to have that panel discussion about NG911 and what we've learned, I'll be happy to field those questions, or we can just do that. So you get a presentation with an option. What do you think, Kim? Put you on the spot here.
We could put a vote out in the chat that you could just option 1 or option. Let's see. Let's restate the options.
So option 1 is the presentation that I put together that's really talking about change management. Understanding that next generation 911 is causing a lot of change at some level, and it can feel overwhelming for a lot of people. So we walk through how to handle that overwhelming feeling of change related to next generation 911. Or we kind of open it up and have more of a discussion related to Q&A, although it's going to be hard to follow up what Andy and Fred have done, as well as what Jessica did on the first session. So my vote's going to be my option, but I'm biased.
I think that's my vote too. I think that sounds great, actually.
All right, well, let's do that. Let's
do that.
All right, guys. Again, I really appreciate you guys being with us. I appreciate you letting me get all that out to begin with. So let's follow up Sarah's the new first responder frontier session from last year with part 2 that's really going to focus on change management. However, I did want to take a minute to introduce myself to a lot of you guys. I do know several people, but in case you don't know me, my name is Drew Fioranelli. I am a GISP. I have over 13 years of experience working with GIS at a local government level, from GIS tech to specialist to director. I'm also the current president of the Geospatial Information and Technology Association, which is a global nonprofit that's focused on educating, advocating, and connecting geospatial professionals together. So if you're not familiar with GITA, gita.org, check it out. It is a nonprofit, and I'm super passionate about what we do at GITA. I'm also a former volunteer firefighter and was responsible for building the GIS program for the city of Asheboro, North Carolina. So for a lot of you GIS folks that are the only GIS person in your city or county, and every 30 minutes you wear a different hat, I know what you're going through. So last year's presentation related to this new first response frontier focused a lot on culture and identifying the culture around public safety. So I really wanted to start this presentation picking up where that one left off and starting with culture. So every culture has its own unique culture. So every community has its own unique culture defined by a collective set of values and habits that condition actions of people within the organization. That is no different than anything related to GIS and public safety. We are our own unique cultures. And being thrust into next generation 911 is going to create a little bit of havoc and a little bit of change for these communities that predominantly have operated siolistically. I don't know if it's a word, but it's a word today. Because these are two communities that provide great value to people and to our communities that we participate in. But before next generation 911, they didn't overlap a lot because GIS hasn't really been a core process or product of public safety. We were not really responsible for helping save lives. We provided data to support CAD maps, but you didn't rely on our data to make sure you got there. You use data to help you get there, if that makes sense. There's a little bit of a difference. So cultures happen either by default or design. I agree with that wholeheartedly. GIS has been this community from the 60s that kind of evolved around producing maps and services and products for land management. Just think over the last 5 to 10 years how we've seen that evolve to a point where we're bordering on eliminating the term GIS and evolving into geospatial intelligence or business intelligence or location intelligence, because we're finding that while the map is an extremely important part of the story, it's not the whole story in itself. The process used to write the story to get to that visual mapping product is really where a lot of focus is on, and even more so now on the data component when we talk about next generation 911. How important is data to NG 911? I think we can all agree it's extremely important. So successful leaders shape their cultures instead of allowing their cultures to shape the community. I would agree with that as well. We've identified rock stars and superstars and leaders here at WLIA that are helping shape what the transition to and path towards next generation 911 looks like in Wisconsin, with folks like Fred, like Andy, having partners like Geocom, having DataMark participate in these types of conversations, I think is all leading to helping figure out what that transition looks like and shaping what that future looks like. So it's really powerful to have all of these leaders together having conversation around a common topic. Leaders who do this best treat culture as a business strategy with an ongoing commitment to continually refine the culture in response to major changes within the organization to strategy and culture. Absolutely. You can take all that, wrap it up, squeeze it around real tight, put it in your pocket, because next generation 911 is forcing us to do that now. Force is a bad word, but it's a good one for this statement. All right, so what about change? Because we just talked about culture. We didn't really talk about change. Well, Drew, you started this off talking about change management. Well, we have to identify that change is not a threat to culture. When you talk about public safety, you talk about professionals and individuals who really believe in their mission and their purpose. And anything that seeks to upset that is a challenge and can be challenging because it means change. Now, that's all next generation 911 feels like for a lot of people right now, because we're pulling in GIS data and other professionals that do things outside of public safety that traditionally we haven't had to talk to or know. And it's kind of scary to think that way, but it's a product of the circumstance, right? Think about things that you don't know. Let's talk about legacy GIS. At some point in our careers, we all come across an anomaly or an issue with our data that's existed for years, but it's not a problem until somebody points it out as a problem, right? So this transition to next generation 911, it's kind of that way. We knew that GIS played an important role in some aspects for local government, but we're just now starting to see the true value of leveraging GIS in these public safety environments and these 911 environments, right? Because for how many years have we just been known as the mapping person or the mapping guy? And now we're producing highly accurate geospatial information that's responsible for quality decision making. That's a significant change. So change is inevitable at the end of the day. While change is not a threat to our GIS culture or our public safety culture, we have to acknowledge that change is going to happen. And how we manage that change is going to determine how successful we are moving forward. And we only can do that by acknowledging it. And Next Generation 911 is introducing a massive cultural shift in how we communicate, how we manage our data, and how we execute processes across multi-departmental structures to support this technological advancement that is Next Generation 911. So I'll tell you, I can't believe I wrote that statement because it sounds extremely intelligent, but it makes a ton of sense when we start thinking across multi-departmental. It's bringing on this concept that GIS for Next Generation 911 is not isolated in a box, because we can't just look at our data and manipulate and change and adjust our data to fit the needs for Next Generation 911. Because what's going to happen when we do that? We're going to break our tax system, or we're going to break our Parks and Recs data management process, or something with, waste management. So it's a new cog in the wheel. But just because there's a new cog means we still have to pay attention to these 25 other that we're already responsible for. So again, we're putting on another hat, and it's going to start getting heavy, and it's going to start feeling heavy. And I can tell you, when we break it down into smaller portions, it's easier to consume. So try not to get overwhelmed with this massive conceptual idea of now adjusting how you manage data and manage process to support Next Generation 911, but also don't forget all that other stuff you already do as well. It's going to feel crazy. Change management is going to help with that. And for Next Gen, we can identify that having a plan forward and managing for change as it relates to data is imperative, because we can't get so focused on the needs for Next Generation 911 and NENA standards and forget everything else that I just told you about with our tax assessment, with our garbage, and all of the other data sets that we're currently managing. So it helps to have a plan to move forward. And that's where strategic planning can have a very powerful play in this game. So if you haven't started thinking about a plan, whether just in discussion or jotting down ideas, I would encourage you to do that. It's going to help you with the process, and pull other people to the table. That's your team that you're developing, because not only is it affecting GIS and public safety, if your addressing administrator doesn't sit in the GIS office or in the public safety office, maybe they sit in planning, they're important to this conversation and they're important to the team. So you have to bring them to the table to have the conversation as well. Your neighbors are going to be a part of your team as well, because changes that you make locally may affect a boundary or boundary data for your neighbors. Make sure you're on the same page. You have to be willing to engage across departmental. So where education and knowledge are going to play a significant role in this transition. Being able to execute on some planned path forward is going to be important as well. So execution for Next Generation 911, again, is something that can feel overwhelming because a lot of people don't know where to start. Taking that first step, you guys have already done it. You're having conversations. There have been several conversations around WLAA events, and you've just completed a gap analysis, which is a massive first step. So I applaud you for that. Now you got to figure out what to do after that. And we're going to talk a little bit about it. I got some ideas for you. Having a measure of success. This scales all levels, from local government all the way up to the state. The ability to measure where you're successful is going to really impact the force momentum that you had behind moving forward. And you have to celebrate the small wins as well. We're going to circle back to that a little later as well. But you need to know where you are and where you're going so that you know when you've gotten there that you're successful. And it's all based around improvement. We have to continue to improve, and let improvement be a motivation behind the decisions that we're making. So a quick review of Next Generation 911. I've got to fly through these next 3 slides. So we need to understand the need for change. And a lot of it involves with the way that we use GIS in the call routing component of 911 right now. So on the left side of the screen is a rough legacy call routing process using MSAG and ALI in our 911 databases. But on the right, you're starting to see a spatial interface with GIS data in that spatial interface, and the location validation function and the emergency call routing function, leading us to believe that GIS is going to play more of a significant role in this call process that is 911. It's a big reason to change. We also have to understand that the current data sets that we're using to support this call routing process are not spatial, they're tabular in nature. So using our MSAG and our ALI to help us do spatial process is not going to work real well moving forward. It's, it continues to bewilder me that we haven't transitioned away from this sooner, but there hasn't been a significant or marginal need to, because cell phones are not that old when you think about, hey, for that reason, 911's not that old. Didn't we just celebrate a birthday for 911? So happy birthday to, yeah, it was yesterday, wasn't it? Yeah, happy birthday to 911. I didn't get a cake or a slice of cake. That would have been great. So understanding the need to move away from these tabular data sets into something that is more spatial in nature is going to impact that process. And so many standards. There are a lot of standards related to NG911. Now, I'm making an assumption here because I didn't grow up in the 911 world, but I know how many standards are continuing to be developed and evolved for next generation 911. I don't know how that compares to legacy 911. I'm assuming there were standards, but were there as many? So the amount of standards coming out that are around GIS and supporting GIS for this new function is fairly significant as well, leading to change. So preparing for change is going to be extremely important. And I wanted to introduce you guys to something that was introduced to me about 7 years ago, and it continues to play a significant role in my personal and my professional life. And it's this acronym. Yes, I'm giving you another acronym to remember, and it's ADKAR. It's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And it was created by Prosy. And I'll tell you, I'm not a certified Prosy instructor. I'm not certified under Prosy's change management program. But this has had such a significant value on me because it helps me break down what is around any decision that I need to make, whether I'm dealing with staff as a leader or I'm dealing with personal decisions that I need to make, like buying a car or buying a house. So where ADKAR can have impact can exceed into any decision or change-making process that you have. So awareness is really kind of the need for change. That's what we've been going through over the past several years, and Wisconsin has made a significant effort towards with the gap analysis. What great awareness that gap analysis has provided to the state and to locals around GIS data. Desire to change. Change is not forced. You cannot force change because we will revert back to what we know, or we'll just fight the system. So you have to want to change. Desire is to support the change itself. So if you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it. There's nobody that can make you do it, right? I think back to my childhood days, and my mother would force me to clean my room. Do you know how long I spent fighting against her to do that? If I would have just cleaned my room when she asked me to, I would have been done, but we were still fighting, right? I didn't have the desire to do what she wanted me to do, so I fought her on it. Oh, Mistake number one, fighting my mom against cleaning my room. She's always going to win. Knowledge of how to change. I feel like we're really getting into this component around the next generation 911 conversation, because you kind of have the people over here that have the knowledge and the desire and the awareness around next generation 911. But we know there are still people out here that don't know why they need to go to next gen or what it is or how it's going to affect them. So when you have opposite ends of the spectrum, holistic change is impossible. It's going to be segmented. And that's okay if we acknowledge that there's segmented change happening. Now we have to work on getting knowledge and education for these other folks that are still questioning why. Ability to demonstrate skills and behaviors to change. So if you have the awareness and the desire and the knowledge to change, can you physically do it? Right? I have the awareness of changing my engine oil in my car because my engine oil light is on. I have the desire to do it because if I don't do it, I'm going to blow up my engine. Do I know how to change the oil in my car? Absolutely. If I don't, I can go figure it out because there's a ton of YouTube videos on how to do it. But do I have the ability? Do I have the tools necessary to make that happen? I may not, which is why I take it to a service center and they do it for me, right? Same kind of concept with next generation 911. Do you have the ability to support the change that's necessary to transition to that environment? And then reinforcement. Reinforcement is such an important part of change that I think is often overlooked. Think about new management that comes into an environment, or you transitioning roles within your organization. Management is how we make things, or reinforcement is how we make things stick. Right. So if I were to tell you, Kim, hey, here's a new document that I want you to start filling out related to X business practice that you're doing, and I never mention it again, is that going to stick? It's probably not. You're going to revert back to what you know, or lose the desire to want to make that change because I'm not reinforcing it. So reinforcement is a critical component to any part of change. What you don't want to do is go through the awareness, desire, knowledge, and ability and get people fired up for it, and you forget it. You're fighting a losing battle. So develop a path or a process to encourage and really kind of stick to something that's going to provide reinforcement. And reinforcement is not negative, right? It's a positive reinforcement. Right? Because we're encouraging, we're supporting, and we want this to stick so that it just becomes common practice. So I really want to break this down. So how does this relate to next generation 911 and why do I care? So as I stated earlier, with awareness, that your gap analysis results is the perfect evidence to really providing that awareness of really where and how and why change is necessary. What does your data look like? Are you seeing some things uncovered that you didn't know? Because you just, I don't know what I don't know. That's okay. But now that you know, you have the awareness to know that things need to change. And we identify that through things like our data validations, which I'm assuming would have been part of your gap analysis results, identifying specifics around your data. What percentage of your data has duplicate address points? What percentage of your address points do not map to your road center line, right? That's significant information that's going to provide the information that we need for moving forward, and in a sense, tell us how we're going to do it, right? But we're looking at percentages, which is great because it gives us a holistic view of what that change looks like. So now that we have this, we are armed with more information to build support internally and externally to support this change. Internal to our GIS and public safety departments to build that awareness of, guys, we've got to do something different because what we're doing now is great. We need to be just a little better, right? It gives us the ability to educate cross-departmentally. So bring the other team members to the table and educate them on the results of the gap analysis. Show them where things are off or where things can improve, and provide the education on why. Why is it important not to have 2% of your address points duplicated? Why is it important to work towards correcting the 8% of your data that doesn't map to a road center line? What's the downstream effect of that? So you have to tell that whole story from start to finish, because now it's supporting not only public works, parks and rec, tax assessment. It's supporting this life-saving function that's 911. Start understanding your data supply chains. Where's your data coming from? If it's all housed within your department, you're a step ahead of the game. But what if you're pulling road center lines from a state agency? Or what if you're pulling this boundary from fire service, this boundary from EMS, and your address points from planning? You need to understand those supply chains and bring them to the table and educate them on the value of correction around that gap analysis, because that's going to impact improvement moving forward and keeping it consistent as you move forward. As I stated at the beginning of this, educate those around you on the gap analysis report. It's going to help build consensus and build support for the change itself. Because while we understand it from a GIS perspective, and in most cases from a public safety perspective, to other people, GIS is maps. It's not data, and it's not using data to make decisions. Identify the important players moving forward, make sure you get them at the table. So we really want to work towards eliminating any silos that we can identify in our organization. GIS, public safety, pick any department X in any county, in any city across the world. There's a silo that exists somewhere. Does that silo affect your process for next generation 911? It may or may not. The challenge is to identify it, to determine whether it does or not. Have it relate back to data in that data supply chain, and that'll give you a better answer to whether or not that silo really affects you, and can you work towards improving communication, improving education cross-departmentally, so that we can work to, poke some holes in the silo. I don't know if we'll ever be able to break it down, because silos in themselves are cultural. So start figuring out how to chink away at the armor. So desire, you have to want it to improve. So I've got some questions here for you. So now that you have your gap analysis results, what's your next step? Have you thought about what those next steps will be, or were you waiting to get the results? In most cases, a lot of people are waiting to get the results so that they can strategize on where they might need to go based on what they're seeing. That's quite all right. I would do the same thing, because if not, I could be planning to go down a path that's not going to take me where I want to go. But now that you have the information in hand, what are your next steps? Have you thought that far ahead? Are the results what you expected? There's a lot of folks that I've worked with that have told me my data is good. It's great. And then we do a gap analysis for them, and we get it back. And there's so many things that are unexpected, because they were only looking through a frame that made sense to them. And it's framed around how you use data as to what that lens looks like. We have to acknowledge that, because it's extremely important, especially when we're reviewing results like the gap analysis results. We get into a system where we look at data from a perspective of how our data is used to support our activities, not how it impacts others. Because do I care about what you do? What you do is not in my job description or a part of my title. As we start getting into this new world of next generation 911 and GIS's involvement, it is going to be important to understand to some level how other departments may use this data, because you don't want to negatively impact their process because you're making it fit this new round hole or square peg that you're fitting in for next gen 911. And do you see a way forward? I know there are a lot of folks that we've provided these types of results before, and the amount of data that needs to be addressed is overwhelming. And that overwhelming sensation can put blinders on. You cannot see a way forward that doesn't involve money, that doesn't involve additional resourcing, that doesn't involve a higher up decision maker making the decision. This is where I'll tell you to think methodically through those results and break it down into its smallest parts. If you are managing GIS data locally, you have the ability to affect change on some level based on the results of your gap analysis, like identifying duplicate address points. You absolutely can do that with the tools that you have. Identifying missing attribution on your road center lines or your address points. Is it time consuming? Absolutely it is. But it is something that you can do without spending any money, without having a vendor, or without really having a higher up giving you permission to do it. Is it okay if I give you guys permission to do that? Sure, I'm going to. You have my blessing to identify all of the duplicate address points and get rid of them if you can. Go forth and conquer. So thinking about our data from a desire standpoint is you've got to want to make it more accurate than it already is. You have to want to identify the currency or the rate in which you make data changes or edits or update your data. You've got to want to build a better path to consistency. And that's going to be different for people because not everybody's adding data or manipulating data at the same rate because, you know, I'm extremely rural or I'm extremely dense in population. So build it best to where you are, and you have to want to get to that completeness level that's going to support existing action and action moving forward. So desire plays a big role in this, but so you have the awareness and you have the desire, you're motivated to do this, but how do you do it? It starts with knowledge. It all starts with knowledge. So the important things to know about moving forward and things to think about related to knowledge, funding is going to be at the top of everybody's list. I promise you. That's everywhere we go. It doesn't matter if we're downtown Detroit or Cleveland, Mississippi. That is a real place. It's my hometown. And it's this small. Funding is a significant issue for a lot of people because remember when I was telling you about some folks can see the results of their gap analysis and feel overwhelmed at how much change there needs to be, that they can't see past what's right in front of them. Funding is kind of that same thing as well. How do I move forward if I don't have the money to do it? Well, you have to identify what resources you do have and where you can affect change now, because money will come eventually, because this is an eventual process. It's a time-consuming process, and we have to acknowledge this is going to take time. We can't do this overnight. Planning your first step, strategic planning, identifying a path to data remediation, having those cross-departmental conversations and communicating on what changes are necessary to move forward, low-hanging fruit versus high-hanging fruit. Data maintenance. What are your current data maintenance practices and how can you improve them moving forward to address consistency, accuracy, completeness, and timeliness of your data? So it all comes back to data management as well. How are you currently managing your data? Data supply chains. You're going to see me talk about data supply chains quite a bit through this presentation because I don't think we talk about them enough. A lot of people, I know I am one of these people. So when I say a lot of people, I'm pointing the finger at me. When I was in local government, I did not spend enough time thoroughly identifying where my data came from because I didn't care as long as I got it. And I was used to dealing with data that was 3 years old or 5 years old. And in most cases, that's the only answer I needed to provide was, sorry, guys, this isn't as accurate as it can be. It's not a portrayal of reality because it's 3 years old, but it's good enough. We've got to start moving away from that good enough mentality and work to be as best as we can be. Because good enough impacts existing systems in different ways. And with Next Generation 911, it's a significant impact from being best as we can be to being good enough. Could be the difference in a 2-minute response time or a 30-minute response time. So now that I have the knowledge, the desire and awareness, I'm slowly working down this staircase, right? I've got the ability, whether I have additional resources in my shop or I'm the guy. I've taught myself how to do this. I'm really passionate about what I do. Now I have a decision to make to build it or not. And what I mean when I say build it is I have to be methodical in understanding what processes I may build internally to support these systems moving forward. I'm used to building geodatabases. I'm used to building feature data sets. I'm used to building schema for my geodatabase and yes, messing that up and having to start all over again. I'm used to building ETL processes, and to an extent, I have the ability to build data validations. I can go find code to run fishbones. I can go find code, or I'm just self-taught in Python and can do some things like look for duplicate address points and run some small data comparisons. Here's the problem you run into when other people around you figure out that you can build things. They want things too. Right? So now you become the mapping guy that can build things. It's really cool. It gets really old really quick because not only are you developing custom code or custom process to support these additional functions, but now you're the guy that's responsible for supporting them long-term through Silverlight changes, through Esri version changes every 6 months, transitioning from desktop to pro, new CAD systems. So really think hard and long about the end process. Don't think about where you need to be right now. Think about where you want to go over the next 3 to 5 years. And if you want to be the person that's responsible for supporting those systems, go at it, have fun. I want to see what you build because I know how creative this community can be. But be careful not to get stuck in a process of building and supporting and maintaining all of these custom processes that you can't think holistically through any of them long-term. Right? Think about data quality. Now that you can build all these things, everything comes back to data quality, not just for next generation 911, but for our existing systems as well. So is data available? The data that I need to support X system, do I have it? Is all of the data present? Is it necessary? Your gap analysis is a great process for understanding the completeness of your data and what's there and potentially what's not there. Does your data reflect the real world? So how accurate is your data? What best practices are you using for address point placement? Are you using center of structure? Are you using front door? Are you using a separate address point for ingress egress at property? Think through these things because that's the purpose of what we're building is representing a 3D and 4D environment in a 2D interface. Is the data available when I need it? Maybe. How often am I updating data? So that works both ways, not just from the GIS seat in the house for providing data updates, but are you getting the information that you need from your other departments as timely as you can? Are they getting as-built to sit on their desk for 5 or 6 months where they've issued occupancy and you don't have an address in your GIS, but these people have been living there for 3 or 4 months? So think this data supply chain, remember? Think through the entirety of the process, not only the points, lines, and polygons that you're managing, but the information that's coming to you to support the development of those points, lines, and polygons, as well as data attribution. And is there consistency across the data? Consistency from data attribution, all caps versus mixed case versus lowercase, AV, AVE versus avenue spelled out. Identify that we're all human and we can all fat finger an A every now and then. Or the good one is a space at the very beginning. Those are fun and will have you pulling your hair out time and time again. Raise your hand if you've done that before. I have. So think about the consistency of your data, and consistency plays a significant role when you have multiple data editors. So make sure you're all doing the same thing or limit the number of people that are touching the data with the ability to edit it. So again, staffing patterns will significantly contribute to the ability that you have, whether you're a department with no GIS or you're outsourcing your GIS responsibilities. Is GIS a secondary responsibility for you? So your title is Chief Planning Officer for your county, but you know GIS because you took some GIS courses in college. right? Supporting Next Gen 911 as a secondary role is probably not a good idea. Nor are you going to have the desire to want to do that because your background is in planning. GIS is a big part of planning. If you're a single person GIS shop, you're already wearing a ton of hats. Do you have the bandwidth to support this transition to NG 911? Some people yes, some people no. Identify that early so that you can start making decisions as a part of that strategic planning process on what's needed to support this massive migration. I say massive migration like it's going to happen now. It's over time, but you need to be aware of it. Are you an enterprise GIS department where you have multiple resources at the ready? Identify what data they're supporting and what bandwidth they have to support data for Next Gen 911. If you have a staff member that's supporting address points and road center lines, but someone else who's supporting public safety data, make sure they're communicating because they're supporting data for two different reasons. One, on the addressing and road center line side, is probably purely for land management and assessment. They need to be brought into the public safety conversation. That's where having those conversations in cross-departmental education is going to be valuable. If you're outsourcing your GIS data management and support, make sure your vendors are aware of the changes that are necessary to support you for Next Gen 911. And I'll be the first to tell you, your CAD vendor is going to get you some of the way there. Dig deeper into that conversation. I will encourage you that if you are outsourcing any part of GIS to a vendor, ask a ton of questions because your success is going to rest on their ability to make sure they can support you. If you need help on questions, give me a call. I got some for you. But don't get caught in a whirlwind of just saying such and such is going to do it for me because they may not have the ability to do it. So ask the right questions. So again, with ability, strategic planning is going to be extremely important early on. Improving knowledge of systems and data, existing systems and your existing data, the gap analysis step is one step of that. Identify current systems that you're supporting with GIS as well. Because as you make improvements to your GIS data for Next Gen 911, make sure you don't break a system. Like a lot of CAD systems will only support 2 or 3 digit characters for street type. Well, if you go through and batch change all of those to fully written out, you may break something in CAD. Don't do that. Be aware of it so that you can make smart decisions around how to execute that change. And then data management practices. Both how are you managing data now to support your existing processes and systems? And then how will you make changes to that workflow to support Next Gen 911? So remember, reinforcement is extremely important in this process. Why am I going to hit hard on reinforcement? Because if we don't, we revert back to what we're doing. We also have to identify that change is difficult for anybody, but sustaining change is even more difficult. So with minimal reinforcement, I can get you to make a change for a couple of months. But without sustained reinforcement, you're going to revert back to what you know, and then I'm going to be the bad guy, right? You're going to start seeing me as a hurdle or somebody that's in your way, and I really want to build a coalition and build a team that's moving for the same thing. Acknowledge that change takes time. Specifically with Next Generation 911, this is going to take time. This is a system that's over 50 years old, that's had very small changes to it over the last 50 years. We're not going to integrate significant technological advancement overnight, right? Because why? It costs money. It also involves significant departmental change to do, and change doesn't happen overnight either. Take small steps forward. The gap analysis is an amazing small step to take forward. Now you have something that you can plan against. Building on reinforcement. Develop a feedback loop with your leaders, with your supervisors, with your team members to continue to exchange knowledge transfer and communication about what you're making so that you continue to learn. These types of events, WLIA, local events that you can have related to GIS and Next Generation 911 are great for providing reinforcement and supporting that feedback loop. Be publicly visible with what you're doing towards Next Gen 911. This is a great time to educate the public on what 911 actually is. And I say that because our expectation of 911 is the same for everybody that's not in public safety or has ever been a call taker. I need help. I dial 3 numbers and somebody shows up. What happens if I get a busy tone? Or what if they can't find me? This is not NCIS, right? Where the person that took my call is also going to respond to that call. A drone is not going to automatically deploy and come and see me and give a bird's eye view of what's going on with me with facial recognition and identify all of the sensors within my immediate area to pinpoint my accurate location. Real world doesn't work like that yet. One day, maybe we have visualized it, we might get there. So educate internal and external and build that support. Celebrate the small wins and celebrate the large wins. You improve your gap analysis results by 3%. That's an amazing win. Give yourself a pat on the back, give them half a day off or a whole day off. Celebrate that because it required a ton of work and a ton of effort. That's also how you reinforce this change, by celebrating it. Again, communication is key. Accountability. Be accountable for what you say you're going to do and where you're going. Strategic planning will help with accountability, and build and continue to build understanding around why you're doing the things you're doing. And then often reassess to make sure you're still on the right track. So I want to do a little bit about data supply chain. I think we're okay on time. So data supply chain is important because we want to build our knowledge and understanding around our data, from creation all the way to destruction, continually asking the who manages it, who builds it, who created it, to what purpose does it serve, why does it exist, when, how old is it new, is it old, how often does it get updated, where can I find it, if it's not mine, where can I get it, how often can I get it, and why do I need to get it. What's really important about this data lifecycle is this very last bullet, destruction. I don't think I've ever seen a diagram like this that had destruction on it. So I grabbed it immediately because it's significantly important and often forgot about. This is part of our maintenance and management of our data. We need to identify if data can be removed, maybe put to a layer that's not turned on, or removed completely, because our goal is to have the most accurate representation of reality that we can. And we know that we demolish and destroy things in public, roads, bridges, homes. Let's make sure our GIS is representative of reality. And to do that, we may have to hit delete. Delete's a hard button to hit in the GIS office, I promise you. All right. Be repetitive with reinforcement, both from celebrating wins to process. And I'm specifically going to talk about the cyclical process of doing data validations, gap analysis, remediating your data, and managing your data. So I have a diagram up here that's identifying creating your data package to upload it into some validation system, whether it's something that you build internally or something that you've gotten from a vendor, running those validations, downloading or getting a report of anomalies, collaborating within your coalition of NG911 leaders and professionals to remediate and make changes, and then fix it. This repetition is going to create reinforcement in itself from a data standpoint. It's also showing you that data validations are not one and done. They should become part of your process. States of change. I think, we're almost to the end, but I'm having a ton of fun. So I wanted to break ADCAR down back into systems of process, right? So if we're looking at awareness and desire, that's that gap analysis. That's our current state. As we transition, we have knowledge and ability. That's where strategic planning is going to play a significant role. And in the future, the ability to continue to run data validations and have these conversations is that reinforcement, right? So current is awareness of the need to change and the desire to participate in and support the change. Transition, that strategic planning portion, requires knowledge on how to change and the ability to implement the required skills. And then future requires ability and reinforcement to sustain the change. So taking that ADCAR acronym and breaking it down into a process to support next generation 911, I've tried to capture that here, and I think I did okay with it. You guys will have to let me know what you think. And that's it. We're at the end, man. This is so much fun. If anybody's got any questions, let's take them. I'll also remind you, come visit us in room C at the DATAMARK booth. Do we have any questions, Kim?
I don't have any questions. I love the idea of reinforcement because that's something that I think we often struggle with. We spend so many hours designing this shiny process, and we pour all of our efforts into it, and we hand it off, and we're like, see, isn't this great? And then 6 months later, you get a paper envelope in the mail that says someone assigned a new address, and you're like, why aren't they using it?
Exactly. Reinforcement.
So yeah, that's a great concept to remember, to loop back with those people and say, hey, how's it going? Is this working for you? Is there anything I can do to help refine that process? So,
yes,
things change that you don't see. And, sometimes it's good to just check in with those people that are supporting you to see if things are still working.
Or that they're using it at all.
Yeah, exactly.
great. And I'm going to walk something back because I have a ton of respect for Peter. You're right, Peter. Maybe depreciate rather than destruct, or move to an archived layer if there's data that's no longer necessary, because it does provide historical value, especially when it comes to address points or structures or roads.
Mm-hmm.
I do agree with something being in there, because I hate 15 rogue copies of my address, of my master address point layer out there. So archiving, deprecating, depreciating, getting rid of somehow that data that you don't want floating around is an important step.
Agreed. I totally agree.
For sure. And I did look it up. The first 911 call was completed in Alabama by a state senator who probably took all the credit, right? On February 16th, 1968.
Yep.
So there you go.
And
learned a little piece of trivia.
And Haleyville, and it was really from one building to another.
No.
Or it could have been within the same building. There's a weird story around it. But it was the birth of 911.
Wow. Does anyone else have any thoughts, questions?
When developing, I guess, a strategic plan, do you have some of your, I guess, best kept advice in terms of developing something like that?
I do. So best practices for developing a strategic plan is really going to identify where you are currently. So spend some time on figuring out your current state. Data management workflows, data supply chains, who's doing what. So identify all of the players and all of the pieces to the puzzle, because that's your starting point with your strategic plan. And the goal is to figure out how to get where you're going. So through your strategic plan, you'll take your addressing coordinator and identify their roles and responsibilities with creating address and managing address points for GIS, and how that workflow may need to change to support Next Gen 911. And it could be as small as adding 2 or 3 attributes to the data that now they need to manage, like a zip code layer or a county, a zip code column or a county column, or even a state. So strategic planning will not only identify the big holistic vision and path, but also the small things.
Good. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you so much, Drew.
Absolutely.
And to all of our presenters today,